this. Thank you ever so much. Gosh, what a treat to see real people in 3D. It's the first time I've done this for a couple of years now, so delighted to be here today. So I'm the Chief Executive of the charity, and it's a real privileged position that I hold. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about another passion of mine, which is community compassionate care. And I think it's something that we can continue to enhance and work on. So I often think of baby loss in two parts. There is the utter devastation, the pain, the shock, and the trauma of losing a baby. And then there is the rest of your life following. And these are my own words. They're my own words because I had to do this myself. I had met my son. I had spent 3 weeks loving this little boy. And I had to say goodbye to him when he died. I had to leave him, not be able to see him or his little face ever again, and leave this building and leave him essentially with strangers. And you can only but imagine the devastation that causes families to walk out of that building, and then what they face afterwards and how they actually cope. And that's really a big passion of mine. The loss of your own is an extraordinary loss. It cannot be compared to any other kind of loss. It is different from somebody in a family, someone who's been here and lived, and you share stories with them and you reflect on your time together. The loss of a baby is about your hopes and dreams. It's the possibility that all that was ahead, and you live a life with somebody missing. The impact and the devastation caused is really lifelong. And I think we still are misunderstanding the real impact that this has on families, and it's why we're so passionate about the care that we provide. So COVID, as you can imagine, has made things incredibly difficult for bereaved parents. So grief is isolating in itself. But families were having to be on their own. They're not able to have like those cups of tea, the shoulders to cry on, the bowls of soup, the washing, the other children being looked after. These kind of traditional sort of elements of grief that we hold. And I think only until COVID did we realise that the traditions are there for a reason. We grieve better with others. We share stories. We talk about who they were to us. We prepare for the eulogy. And we recall who they were and what did their life mean to everybody else. And that was completely taken away. But it's often taken away from bereaved parents anyway, because there was no little life to share about who they were and what did they mean. Because it was to those parents, it was what the life was going to mean to everybody around them. And so we've really noticed a big impact on families, really grieving alone. So the charity made sure that we were there. We didn't furlough. We wanted to shine a light at a very dark time. And we've definitely seen, unfortunately, an increase in that kind of trauma and PTSD and complex PTSD, which I'll touch on. So we're a trauma-informed charity. We have done a lot of work to learn as much as we can and listening to the parents and making sure that we are as informed about the impact as anyone can ever be. So what we've learned is that trauma is not for somebody else to say whether we think it's trauma that has been endured or we think that they've had a traumatic experience, but indeed it's how the person processes that trauma which becomes trauma. So you could have two identical situations and families, and one person could be very traumatized by that and the other not. You can't see trauma, but you can hear trauma. So trauma is around past experiences, people's vulnerabilities perhaps, and perhaps complex childhoods that can lead to more trauma in somebody's life. and also how they recall it at the time, but also moving forward. So it's around the processing of that experience for an individual. So we know about trauma because we listen. So families talking about flashbacks, panic attacks, nightmares, the inability to function, that is trauma. And in the charity, we've done a huge amount of work on that and really proud of what we can offer families. So given what I've just said about this extraordinary loss and the pain that's endured and the trauma that many families endure through this process and this event in their life, we're still at a point in society where we often will say, well, there's a charity that could support you, or have you found support? Or is somebody else looking after you and is your care being met? And actually the onus, if we think about that, is very much on the bereaved parent. But we know that grief is heavy, it's complicated, it's foggy, it's anger, it's sadness, it's the inability. For anybody who's had a grief of your own here will know it's not a logical thing that one day you feel a bit better, a bit brighter, and you think, so where was the leaflet that I was given? Where was that card? Now, who was that person that they spoke about? It doesn't work like that. So this onus on families, we know, isn't reaching the full potential of everybody. And that's not possible because not everybody is able to do that. It takes so much courage to think, I deserve this care, I need to look for this care and find that. Not everybody will feel that they, one, have the ability to do that. They might have a background or circumstances that doesn't allow for that. But also that we know that, unfortunately, people like to blame themselves for loss because it's much easier to blame yourself. And if you blame yourself, then why would you seek support for yourself if you think it's your fault? Or what if your childhood, you have had multiple complex things happen to you, like trauma after trauma? It's just another thing. It's just another trauma. And so why would you think, well, this is different. I deserve this. So already we are limiting what we can, provide because it's back onto the onus of families. So we need to work better, and we need to work harder and more collaboratively. And there's a proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. And that really rings true when it comes to bereavement care. Collectively, the journey of the family is a long one, and we need to work as much as we can together. Because ultimately, of course, absolutely nobody should face this alone. I'm absolutely delighted to say that today is the first time I can publicly talk about a new project and initiative that we have called Hospital to Home. It's hopefully a new way of supporting families, and we really hope that we can lead the way in highlighting how this can be successful. It's been something we've considered for many years, and so you're the first people to ever hear about it. So it's a pilot project funded by the Big Lottery, and it aims to support families whose baby has died between 14 and 24 weeks in pregnancy. The project intends to fill a gap in the transfer of bereaved parents from the hospital to home by providing bespoke and targeted short-term bereavement support for families at a time when they need people more than ever. This will allow the hospital to home workers to reach in rather than the families reaching out. The aims of the project then, we've got big aims for it. I guess the overriding and an overwhelming aim is that it will provide equality and care and compassion for all. It's so important that we can all offer that reach-in service, and everybody deserves that support. We also hope that by that early intervention we'll reduce the isolation that families feel. So I've already told you around the impact that baby loss has on families, but also coupled with COVID. So we really hope that by being there in those early days and weeks to hold those conversations and to capture that kind of real sort of feeling of emptiness and brokenness, we can allow them to feel that maybe somebody else is there to sort of hear them. And I think that we cannot underestimate that being heard at a time of trauma, because the story needs to be retold and retold and retold. And we need somebody just to sit and listen to that story so that we feel that we are being heard. It allows us to try and process. And as we've talked about, like grief with others, you talk about that person that was in your life, and you remember and you go over. And families need to do that, but they need to talk about the death, because that's all they have of the memories of their baby is sadly a baby that has either been born dead or dies with them. And so that is the story that needs to be retold. There's 2 people grieving. We've done a huge amount of work in the charity to make sure that we're really listening and validating both parents. There is 2 people who are grieving in a home, but they're often at a young age. It's perhaps the very first time they have ever had to deal with a death, perhaps the first time they've had to organise a funeral. And so somebody being there at that time with them to talk about the differentiations of grief with men and women. And we do see that. People grieve differently. And it's around listening and saying, it's the respect and, giving space to each other to grieve, but also looking out for both partners. We hope the hospital to home worker will be able to reach in and identify any emerging complexities that we see arise. So sometimes early on we can hear trauma, we can hear that there's some flashbacks happening, that there's nightmares and people aren't sleeping, and there's some visions that are stuck. And that's the hope of the project, is allowing that to be heard at the beginning and maybe identify that some counselling, and we are advanced with our counselling that we offer to both treat PTSD and complex PTSD. And there are different modalities that treat those, and that if we, in the early stages, can allow to come in with the right treatment, then what we hope is that the parents will not then endure that suffering. And we are hearing of families, particularly in COVID, who are coming back 10 years later saying, I'm still having panic attacks. And almost it becomes the norm, because we've allowed it to become the norm, because we say, it must be very difficult, to have lost a baby, but not to endure a life of pain and not be able to get the right treatment to move forward. And we hope we can just assist and be there for families so that we can connect everyone together. This won't replace any of the amazing services that are already out there. So your community midwife, the health visitor, and other extended services. But we'll at least be able to be a voice to make sure that everybody is talking and make sure we really are aware that when roughly the 3 months that this hospital to home project will be involved with this person's life, that nobody is leaving them isolated and alone. So possible support that the new project will deliver. We hope it will maybe be a midwife. So, I'm planting that seed for anybody here. It might be somebody who's thinking about retiring but not quite ready to step away. But somebody with that background who will be able to offer some advice, both sort of physically but emotionally in those early days. Go out to the home and look in the whites of their eyes and say, but how are you? How can I help you? We know that the funeral and those memory making in those early days is really, really important. I personally think that the funeral is underestimated. If we can speak to a parent before the funeral, we have an opportunity of reminding them that this person was in their life because they had a pregnancy with this little baby. So where did they go in the pregnancy? Was there some music that they listened to? Was there some flowers around that reminded them? Did they do any activities, go on any holidays while they were pregnant? And then slowly we see families starting to shape how they organise the funeral, because they say, I used to always go to this beach. So I think of the water actually to do with them. Or actually when they were born, there was daffodils around. And I think of them when I see the daffodils. And actually what these things do is never to be underestimated, because it is the lifelong remembering that helps and provides that foundation and anchors the grief. So I had rainbows at my son's funeral. I played Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And I still, to this day, get people sending me rainbows and saying, I was thinking of Theo today. You cannot underestimate what that does. So somebody being there and allowing them to sort of talk through some of those details is essential. There's some hospital appointments and communication with the hospital. So somebody allaying some of those fears that somebody might have and saying, perhaps, I could come along. Perhaps they want to go back and see their baby. Perhaps they'd like to visit their baby many times before the funeral. So again, somebody to say, well, I could organise that with you. I could speak to, pathology and see if we can go along and see your baby again. Providing information to the extended family. We know that the ripples of grief run deep. There is grandparents, and there's aunts, and there's uncles, and of course there's brothers and sisters that are grieving as well. So taking the whole family and saying, well, how can we support you all? So the siblings, for example, providing some free books, perhaps even speaking to the schools, making sure that everybody is equipped and has the confidence. If they can't speak about it, then being surrounded by people that understand and love them and are looking out for them. And of course, returning to work. So we recently did a lot of presentations around that return to work under 24 weeks and how at this point in time we see families obviously unable to take that leave because the maternity leave starts at 24 weeks. So families finding themselves in a GP surgery asking for a sick line. And of course they're not sick, they're sad. So somebody being around to assist with that, perhaps speaking to their workplace, perhaps giving some advice. I recently spoke to a bereaved couple and the dad was really fearful about returning to work. And I met him last week and he'd actually called 30 of his colleagues together and he told them about his baby daughter and shared her life and how he was doing and said, I'm not myself, but I'm here, I'll do my best. But I wanted to make sure that, that I'm a changed man. I come now as a dad. And I just was so incredibly proud of him for being able to stand up and do that. But that was, again, he says, through discussions that he would never have considered doing that himself. So this is a busy slide, but it's the very best way of me seeing who we are and what the charity does. So this quad of information is kind of the heart of Held in Our Hearts. Our counselling is recognising the trauma, as I've spoken about. So we offer our counselling for up to 18 months to families. It can be individual or as a couple. And we support in different areas across Scotland as well. Our peer support, our befriending, is around a bereaved parent who's weren't journeyed before, who understands, that provides a continuity, somebody to hold their hand throughout the whole journey. It doesn't change. It's the same person who's able to give them a ring. They can text when they go for a scan, perhaps, or if they're at a different point in their journey. It's somebody that's always there. It's that reaching into somebody. It might be a Zoom. It might be meeting for a coffee. But they become well known with that person, and of course they can say, I remember that for myself. I remember the trickiness of returning to work, or my complexities of relationships, or friends falling pregnant again. And it's probably the only voice that they truly actually believe understands. Collaboration, as I've touched on already, nobody can do it on their own. It needs a collective little army around to do the very best that we can. And so we're really pleased that we can work collectively with many charities and organisations, some up here. And it is in working together that we can do the best for the families so that they definitely feel that at touch points wherever they are, people are understanding. And our peer support is extensive. I think the proudest one on there is probably the dad's support. We've done a huge amount of work and we have 3 bereaved dads who are now trained. And they have their own WhatsApp group. And we've really noticed a difference in dads feeling supported. But at any point in somebody's journey after, like we talked about that first slide, that walking out the hospital, I guess what we do is put a bit of a safety vest on them and say, we're always here. Doesn't matter where you are in your journey. You might feel like you're drowning again, but we've got you. We've clipped you in, and when we listen, so we add our groups and we add our supports around what the family's needs are. And everything we do comes from our values. So our values are of empathy, because with the shared experience and that understanding allows us to really connect with the families. The connection comes with however they want to journey, and we all adapt and grow around the parents and where their needs are at the time. And love, well, every baby that comes into this world brings a lot of love, and the support in the charity always comes with love. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nicola. Fantastic. That's a very busy charity, and it's lovely to see, from my point of view, a very integrated system provided for parents to be properly supported, and including the fathers as well. That's great, fantastic. I just wondered if anyone had any questions for Nicola. I don't know where. I think we've got a roving mic. Look, there it is. It's your opportunity. Could be anything that Nicola said that you wondered about. Aha, well done. You get the first prize for being the first questioner.
Being bold enough to put your hands up.
Bold. You might want to speak to them.
I was wondering if you think there needs to be a change in the language that we use when we discuss the loss of a baby with families.
Do you mean at the time of the birth of the baby in the hospital, or do you mean more around that kind of community or in society? Oh, it's on.
Everyone really, like the way that healthcare professionals address it or mention it, the use of the terms miscarriage or pregnancy loss. I was just wondering what you think, how they make people feel, really.
Yeah, I mean, we hear that families do feel compassion and they do feel the care from midwives. I mean, we've had some amazing stories of people saying, like even wearing masks, they could see the love and the care in their eyes. And so families, I do feel the support and the care. I think the best thing we can do is really listen to what they are telling us. So at the time, whether it's at the time of trauma or whether it's in the community when they're home, I think listening to, picking up on those key words, isn't it? So it's not about having the answers always. I think we fear baby loss because we think we need to know about it. We need to know everything about it so we can have those conversations. But I think sometimes it's the listening. So our peer support workers are bereaved, but actually rarely they maybe talk about their own baby, because actually all parents want to do is talk about what happened to them. And I think it's picking up. So for example, if somebody's using the word scared, and it's not you sort of trying to find a solution around that. I think it's saying, I can hear you're scared. Is sometimes enough just for them to go, well, yeah, I am, or maybe I'm not so much. And I think in terms of that terminology, yeah, I think we're always really careful. It's not about boxing anybody into a sort of like that gestation. It's around their grief. So it's more holding about how they feel rather about when and what. It's more about, I would say, just if you go at it with your heart, I don't think you can go wrong. But it's a great question. Thank you.
It is. I mean, I think it's also in our culture and our society, we're still quite uncomfortable talking about death. And when it's put together with new life and babies, it seems really difficult to cope with, doesn't it?
We're a death-denying country.
Yeah.
But the biggest fear anybody has is the loss of their own. So we fear death. We fear death anyway. But the death of your own, I think the silence that often bereaved parents feel is actually just of other people's fear. And I think it takes that boldness to just hold that conversation. And there's a phrase somewhere around, like, reminding somebody about their baby or talking about the baby doesn't remind them that the baby died. It acknowledges what happened. And it's okay if somebody is then in tears. The fear is that you upset them, like at work or something. But actually, from my experience, bereaved people don't think, gosh, they made me cry. They think, I'm so pleased that somebody asked me about my baby. And tears are a natural response to sadness, so why would they not? It's changing the way that we think about it. And I think that next generation will bring that with them better, perhaps.
Hopefully so. I have got a question from Laura online, I think, saying, will there be midwifery training? And I'm understanding what Laura's saying is, are you educating students, for example, as part of your support work?
Yeah, so we're very fortunate to have a really good relationship with Napier's. So we often have opportunities to go in and speak to students, but we also do our elective placement as well. And then we currently are delivering training within NHS Lothian and other NHS boards around compassionate care in the community. So yeah, any opportunity we can get, but absolutely it's about education for all And that's the only way we learn, isn't it? How can we be good at what we do if we're not listening to those experiences? So as a charity, we're all around building good relationships, and there's many people here. In fact, believe it or not, my own midwife who delivered my son Theo, who died, is here. So yeah, it's about keeping those conversations and relationships going so that nobody feels there's a block. And I think, for ourselves, when we have referrals come into the charity, and hopefully if we begin to change the way we do that by saying, well, I could ask the charity if they could give you a ring, like that consent, rather than saying, here's a leaflet. We hope to be by name and really understand what we do, and that's through education, isn't it? So
fabulous. Well, it's music to my ears as a teacher. So thank you so much, Nicola, for sharing the work that you're doing. And I'm looking forward to hearing even more later. And I'm sure Nicola's available for the rest of the day for anyone who wants to find out more about the organisation. So thank you.
Thank you so much.